So when we think October, it's really a transition time. Summer's over, but winter's not here yet. It's kind of one of those months. You get some cold nights, but warm days still, and it can be one of the trickiest times to catch bass all across the country, but especially in the South. Anytime fishing's tough, believe it or not, a lot of people will tell you to slow down. I say speed up. And these are 5 baits that I think are must-haves in the month of October. When the fishing's tough, that's gonna generate you bites, and if you're a tournament angler, potentially winning bites. Starting off with lure number 1, which is 2 lures, it's moving topwaters. And the reason I choose moving topwaters is a lot of times fish this time of year are spread out. You need to cover lots and lots of water. And if you're throwing a pop-ar or any other type of slower walking bait, you just can't do that. There's gonna be a lot of dead water, so you need a bait that you're gonna be able to move fast with. And these 2 baits, you've got the standard whopper, plopper, chopo, whatever your preference is there, and then a buzz bait. I like a buzz bait a lot when I can throw it. It's just a little more finesse. I know that sounds weird because there's nothing finesse about a buzz bait. I feel like this tends to get a few more bites, and you'll be surprised. I'm not talking about buzz bait and whopper, plopper, and lily pads. I'm throwing these things down rock banks, bluff walls, flat points, places you wouldn't think to throw a buzz bait, but as these fish tend to wolf pack around in the late summer, fall, it's a great way to get them. Typically, you're not just fishing for one fish. You're fishing for one bite, but it's a group of fish, and something like this kind of just gets that wolf pack frenzy mentality going, and it's gonna get bites. Typically too, you're gonna get better quality bites. I almost never throw a skirt on my buzz bait. You're always gonna see me with some type of soft plastic on the back. This is a G-Crack bellow shad. You guys know all about that if you've watched my channel before. If you haven't, really unique profile, a tight shimmy. It doesn't have that unrealistic boot tail that a lot of swim baits and things like that have, but also this flat side with this buzz bait is gonna allow me to skip it. I can put it way up under walkways and put it in those hard to reach places, which is just something I cannot do with this bait. So the 2 most important things when throwing this, you're trying to cover a lot of water, always 45-degree or parallel the bank. I'm not sitting out casting in. I want my bait the entire way back to be in the strike zone. So I'm gonna sit right alongside the bank. I'm gonna be throwing down it, just trying to be as efficient as possible. 2, from day to day, these fish are gonna move. When I say they're wolf packing, they're roaming. They're not usually sitting on one piece of cover. Wind direction shifts can change how fish are positioned. They could be in the backs of pockets one day. They could be on secondary points the next. Yet again, why covering water is so, so important. And that brings us to lure number 2, the square bill. As I'm throwing this square bill, I'm looking for 2 things: a little bit dirtier water, and I'm also fishing this only in the back halves of creeks, in the backs of pockets. I'm looking for fish that are migrating back with the shad as the shad migrate into the backs of the creeks in the fall, which is a historical transition that is made. And I'm fishing cover on flats. I'm typically not fishing steep banks. I'm gonna go to the back of a creek. I'm gonna find where it flats out and gets so shallow that you think a bass wouldn't be there. And I'm gonna go find that one lay down that's laying out in the middle of that thing. And I'm gonna parallel it with a square bill. That is one of the best ways this time of year to get a bite. Another thing, as I'm fishing these pieces of cover, angles are everything, okay? I don't wanna throw across the piece of cover, with my first cast. There's a strike zone to every fish. If you barely miss that strike zone, you pull them off the piece of cover, you can ruin them. So I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna position the boat, or if I'm standing on the bank or in a kayak, I'm gonna make sure my kayak, or if I'm standing on the bank, I can throw right down that lay down and keep my bait in the strike zone as long as possible. So I wanna keep that fish tight to the cover, keep my bait tight to the cover as long as possible. The biggest tip I have in the fall, a lot of times, fish are keying in on small bait, is try to match the hatch. This bait right here, this is a 0.5 square bill. So this is a small bait right here. Look at the size difference. I've seen days where you throw it all day as a 1-bite bait. This is a 30-bite bait. It's very finesse. I typically throw it on a spinning rod, straight fluorocarbon, 10-pound line, something like that. And this is a bait that I only break out when I have to, because it is a difficult bait to throw. But in the fall, when they're on small bait, especially like if I'm thinking a river system or something like that, I've seen this bait really do a lot of really special things, even though it's not near as much fun to throw as this bigger dude right here, because it's always fun to catch fish on big line. But downsizing, matching the hatch can be a big key in the fall. For my next bait, we're talking about the spinnerbait. You know, with a spinnerbait, you could probably put it in top baits every single month of the year because they are so versatile. You've got heavy ones, light ones, ones with big blades, ones with small blades. But the fall time, shad is the main forage for fish almost all over the country. A spinnerbait is a really hard bait to beat top to bottom. This, I'm almost always in the fall gonna throw a little bit smaller bait than I would say in the pre-spawn. This right here is a 3/8 ounce bait. It's a double Indiana blade. And if I'm in a little bit dirtier water, but I'm not in that mud that calls for the Colorado blade, the Indiana blade is just that middle ground where it's not clear enough for the willow leaf, not dirty enough for the Colorado blade, and it's a unique vibration. Like if you're fishing around a lot of other guys that are throwing that willow leaf blade and you want to show them something different, it's going to give them a completely different thump, a completely different presentation. And one thing I always note, I almost always put some type of swim bait or trailer. With a spinnerbait this small, I'm gonna throw something like this G-Crack Gyro Star on the back of it, pair that up nicely. Like I said, I try to keep my spinnerbaits a little smaller and compact. I'm gonna trim this skirt down, and I would also put a smaller like 3.8. I'm not gonna put that big bellow shad that you've seen me throw before, but that's just too big of a profile for what these fish typically want in the springtime. I'm gonna say this, I've said it again, you cannot fish too shallow this time of year. A lot of people wanna still be out fishing brush and in the summer. I'm not saying you cannot catch fish this way, but fish will begin to shock you how shallow they'll get. Even on a main lake bluff, you'll catch them that deep. Look shallower than all of your competition and throw a little bit more compact moving baits. Big key. Lure number 4 is gonna be the mid-stroll bait.
Spicy.
Yeah, a little controversy, but there's a catch here, okay? Only if you're a live scoper. If you have live scope and fish are suspended on bait in the backs of the creeks, this technique called a mid-stroll can be very important. And it's simply a minnow style bait. You can have a small swim bait too, fish it the same way. But a minnow style bait on a jig head, it's basically a castable Demiki rig. It's a shallower application of a Demiki rig. This is something I'm gonna be seeing fish on forward-facing sonar, casting to them. Simple ball head jig. This right here has a bill on it. You don't have to have that. It can be something as simple as a small fluke style bait. There's hundreds of baits that are plug and play for this. You know, you're gonna throw a lightweight jig head, something like a shaky head or swim bait jig head, and you're gonna throw it out there and basically tight line it back across the top of these fish, imitating a wounded bait fish. Depending on the size of the forage, I've got baits that are 2.5 inches long. I've got baits that are 7 inches long for this. It's a little sneakier. That lightweight keeps it more finesse, more natural looking than your typical forward-facing sonar jig head presentations. Lighter is almost always better. If you can stand the pain of throwing a 16th ounce weight on this little thing and waiting for it to get down to those fish, I think it generates more bites. So lighter is always better. Mid-strolling is a technique we'll probably have to go into at another time, but for those of you that have forward-facing sonar, great way to generate bites in October. And this is the only way you're gonna ever see me slow down in the month of October. And there's one bait that gets an honorable mention in this month, and it's the frog. I'm saying this bait for the month of October for guys that have lots of grass. I mean, I'm talking fields of matted cheese, places like Gunnersville, Pickwick, Wheeler, Chickamauga. These lakes that are gonna have miles and miles and miles and miles of mats for these fish to get under. A frog in the month of October is a dominant way to fish. It's a way that you can cover a lot of that water much faster than flipping and punching, and also catch some really big fish. So if you're fishing cheese mats, and it has to be cheese mats, throw a frog. Those are my top baits for the month of October. A few things to remember: almost always fish fast unless you have forward-facing sonar, and don't be afraid to downsize. It's gonna generate more bites for you. Fish the back halves of the creeks, 45-degree angles on the banks or paralleling, you're gonna catch more bass. Thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more fall content. We got more coming at you.